Everybody, sorry, I just wanted to say very quickly because I don't want to eat into your time,
It's
but
okay.
welcome along to today's webinar on AI and trade. And we could talk about this for weeks and weeks and weeks, but luckily for us, Chen has put together a concise presentation to just kind of get us up to speed in terms of what is going on out there with AI because we hear it all the time. And sometimes, well, speaking for myself, sometimes we understand it and sometimes we don't fully understand the potential impact it could have, but in a positive way and not always in a negative way. So thanks a million, Chen, for being with us today. Chen is the co-founder of Ginger Control. I'll stop talking now and hand over to you. Please tell us all about you and then let us know as much as we need to know about AI and trade. Thanks a million, Chen.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chen. I am one of the co-founders of gingercontrol. Yeah, so today I'll be shedding some light in terms of like the technology side of trade, giving you a perspective on what we've observed on since we started this journey. And by the end of this session, you'll have a fundamental understanding of AI, a clear picture of where trade compliance tech stands today, and the risks and opportunities that technology could bring to. And also like what the future actually holds. Like how does technology and trade compliance work together to bring a better future? So yeah, cool. So who is Ginger Controller? Who are these guys? Like new kids on the block. I mean, we started this journey like pretty much late last year, September. And people will often ask us, like, how did you come up with the name? Um, when we started, we couldn't really think of a proper name to call ourselves, and we just thought we'll just name something temporary for now. And what we observed was the current president. I mean, he's regarded as like Ginger Man, and he was essentially controlling the tariffs. So we're just like we'll just call it Ginger Control. It's like a gimmick. People like heard it, they understood it, and they just thought it's like funny. So we'll just stick with it for now. So hence Ginger Control, the Ginger Man controlling the tariffs. So yeah, so we are a VC-backed trade compliance startup on a mission to simplify trade compliance for customs brokers, importers, and manufacturers. We're currently based in Austin, um, and our team is made up of people from experience across various different industries in trading tech. The simplest way I can describe us is if you imagine tech nerds married trade nerds. So that's kind of like our shtick. Cool. So on our tech side, we've got data engineers, machine learning specialists, AI infrastructure architects, and software engineers. And on the right-hand side, for the trade side, we've got customs brokers, import compliance experts, export compliance experts, and global supply chain professionals too. And it's that combination, the deep technical capability paired with the deep trade compliance expertise, that is who we are. So we see ourselves as two things. Like we have like two mottos. Basically, first, we are the barrier breakers of global trade compliance. Now, what does that mean? So tearing down the silos between systems, jurisdictions, and data formats to make this industry that makes this industry so fragmented. And the second is democratizes. And it's not a political thing. Basically, making the kind of technology that used to be reserved for the Fortune 500 companies, making them accessible to the mom and pop shops, small brokerages, and the mid-market importers who need it just as much, but perhaps they've never been able to afford it. Especially from the last year, we witnessed a lot of businesses closing down because they didn't have the tools at their disposals to prepare for the huge tariff volatility. Cool. So our mission is to simplify global trade compliance. Now, what does that actually mean? Because it sounds like a nice tagline, but let me tell you what we really see on our end. So we see a future where technology propels this industry forward in a way it never has before. Right now, if you are doing cross-border trade, your data is fragmented. You have different teams, you have different systems, different formats for every jurisdiction you operate in. And what we're building towards is a unified structure that lets trade data flow seamlessly across borders, while also respecting the compliance requirements of each jurisdiction. We're not there yet, frankly. Nobody is. But every product we build is one step closer. And in today's session, it's all about giving you the context to understand why that vision matters and how that technology is evolving to make if possible. So, yeah, and like kind of before we get into it, I'd love to do a quick poll on how everyone feels about AI. So, yeah, quick second. So you will need your phones. I'd love to have everyone join in too. Let me see. Okay, cool. So, if people could perhaps go on their phone and then go to this link at the top here, which is minty.com, and then put in the code 1800777712. So yeah, I love to understand how everyone's using AI and like and how they feel about it in trade compliance. Like I understand it's quite new technology, and everyone has different levels of usage. So okay, okay, nice. Also, if anyone has any questions, just feel free to chuck it in the chat. I'll try and go by as we go through. Okay, so it seems like people at least have one AI powered tool in their workflow. Oh, okay, cool. Okay, great. I won't take too much of your time because this presentation might go on for a while, so we'll just keep it at this for now. But yeah, like that's kind of what I expected. AI is new technology, even implementation of AI, especially in trade compliance. It's not as I'm going to say progressive as other industries. So yeah, this makes sense. Cool. Awesome. So what actually is AI? We hear this term every single day. Like everyone's like, "Oh, I use AI," but what does it actually mean? Is it the robots from the movies? Is it Skynet coming down for your customs declarations? The reality is, honestly, it's a lot more boring than Hollywood would have you believe. To really understand AI, we need to step back and have an idea of what builds up to it. Because AI doesn't just appear out of thin air, it sits on top of layers, and each layer matters a lot. So we'll walk through them. So, all right, first layer, data. Everything starts with data, and I mean like everything. Okay. Data is the foundation of anything we will be talking about today. If you take one thing away, is that if you take one thing away from the session, let it be this: like good quality data is like the new oil in tech. All right. It's not really like a joke or anything. It is reality. You can't do any good services without great data. And data is everywhere. Like your phone number is data. Is the price of your coffee you had this morning, that's data. Those Excel spreadsheets you spend half your day in is all data. If it exists in a numerical or written format, it counts. So now we could do like an entire session on data alone, and honestly, we probably should at some point, because how well your company manages and optimizes for quality data will determine how successful you are in trade compliance going forward. But I don't want to overload you just yet. So what I will say from a tech perspective is that data is what any algorithm, any system, any machine needs to understand context. Without data, none of these layers that we saw earlier above would work. It wouldn't work. So cool. Awesome. Now, the next layer, machine learning. Technically, it is deep learning, but to keep it simple for everyone, we're going to refer it into its simplest form, which is machine learning. Now, what this means is basically giving a system a large amount of examples, and the system itself figures out the rules by itself. Think about how you learn to do your job. Like, nobody handed you a list of 10,000 rules on day one and said, follow these. No, okay. You looked at like hundreds of declarations, past rulings, examples of what was right and what was wrong. And over time, you start to develop a feel for it. You start to recognize patterns and such as like, this type of product usually gets classified here. This type of shipment tends to get flagged. So you learn from experience. And that's essentially what machine learning does, except with data instead of experience. So you're probably wondering how does it actually learn? Like, what's the engine inside that makes it possible? Because that's really like the bit that sounds like magic, like a machine having brain, right? But it's not. It's really not. And here's how. So the algorithm makes a guess. Okay, it starts by making a guess, and the first guess is terrible. It's essentially random, but it does something very simple. It checks its guess against the actual answer and measures how wrong it was. And then it adjusts itself just like slightly to be a little less wrong next time. And then it guesses again, then it checks again, and then it adjusts again. And it does this loop thousands of times, not millions of times. Guess, check, adjust, guess, check, adjust. Each time it's tweaking its own internal settings. So that loop, that's the core engine of machine learning. It's not conscious. It's not really thinking. It's just relentlessly optimizing to be less wrong than last time. And it turns out when you do that like millions of times across massive amounts of data, the results can be remarkably powerful. But and this is critical, it also means that the machine is only as good as the examples, the data it learned from you. So if you train it on messy data, inconsistent or biased bad data, it will give you messy, inconsistent, and biased patterns, which brings us right back to data quality, which brings us to the next layer that everyone's talking about. Cool. Now, there's a lot of confusion about what AI really means. So let's clear the air. Okay, so firstly, AI, it is a big umbrella term. It covers a lot of different directions. You have generative AI, you have computer vision, you have predictive analytics, also like the pursuit of AGI, right? It's not just one thing. But from my experience building in the global trade compliance space, when people say I use AI, they typically mean using large language models, also known as LLMs. So let's get specific, okay? ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, those are products powered by LLMs. They're the ones you probably have most of you have probably tried. And here's one that trips people up. So Microsoft Copilot, as you can see on the top right corner, and I want to highlight this because I know a lot of companies are using Copilot internally. Microsoft does not have its own LLM. It's a product that actually uses other models under its hood, such as OpenAI or Anthropic's Claude. The real value of Copilot isn't the model itself. It's actually it's because it's already embedded in your existing data infrastructure. So your SharePoint, your Outlook, Teams, Excel. So it can reason over the data you already have inside the tools you already use. Cool. So now with that out of the way, what is an LLM? What is a large language model? In its most basic form, it, LLM is a system that's been trained on enormous amounts of text data. Now we're talking billions of data points drawn from millions of web pages, books, and documents to understand and generate human language. Okay, think of it as a very sophisticated pattern completion engine. So you give it a prompt and it predicts the most likely response based on everything it's been trained on. Um, so when you type a question into ChatGPT and get an answer back, that is an LLM at work. It's not thinking in the way you and I think. It's generating language based on patterns. A simple analogy is that like imagine you've read every trade compliance textbook, every customs ruling, every regulatory update ever published. You'd be pretty good at answering questions about trade, right? So that's sort of what LLM does, except there's a critical difference. It hasn't understood what it read. Okay, it's learned from the patterns of how the information is expressed, so it can generate very convincing, fluent answers. But it can also confidently produce something that's completely wrong. And for trade compliance, that distinction is everything. And we'll come back to this. But yeah, beyond LLMs, there are a couple of directions worth knowing about too. So first we have generative AI. There's also a broad category. It basically means any AI that creates content, text, images, codes, think like ChatGPT, Claude Gemini, they all fall under this. It's what most people interact with today. Then we have agentic AI. Now, this is where things are headed next. Systems that can make actions and make decisions autonomously, um, chaining multiple steps together without human input at each stage. Think of it as from going AI that answers your questions to AI that does the work for you. Yeah. And there's also one more thing, one technique worth knowing about specifically related to back to generative AI. So RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Why is this important? This isn't a separate type of AI, by the way. It is actually a technique. It is a way of making generative AI more reliable. So instead of the AI answering purely from what it was trained on, RAG connects it to your actual data sources first. Think like your regulatory database, your tariff schedules, your internal records, and generates a response grounded in that real information. And for trade compliance, that is a really big deal because it is a difference between an AI that's guessing from general knowledge and one that's referencing your actual data. Cool. Now, each of these has a very different implication for trade compliance, and we'll touch on these as we go. But yeah, quick overview. Cool. Why data quality is existential. So we've walked through the layers, data, machine learning, AI. Now you know what sits on the bottom of all of it, which is data. Most people in tech use the phrase garbage in, garbage out. And if you're using technology, your vendors probably already said it too. Um, and as a founder, that's true. But I'll put it more bluntly. I think expectations should be higher, especially going forward. If garbage in, then you're out. Okay. And here is why. And I mean, like internal to my team, not you specifically, but the margin of error in trade, global trade compliance is shrinking. It's not growing. Regulations are multiplying. Tariff schedules are shifting. New reporting requirements are landing every quarter. If your underlying data, such as your product classifications, your supply records, your country of origin determinations, if that data is messy, incomplete, or inconsistent, then no amount of AI is going to save you. In fact, if you do use an AI, the AI will just make the wrong decisions faster, but at a greater scale. So this isn't a nice to have anymore. It's quite urgent. And companies that invest in cleaning up and maintaining high quality data now are the ones that will be able to actually leverage the new emerging technologies. Um, Everyone else will be spending their time cleaning up that mess that the bad data has created. So cool. Now let's talk the global dimension. And here's where things get even more complex because data standards are not universal. The way that the EU structures expects trade data is different from the US, which is different from ASEAN, which is different from the UK post-Brexit. Harmonized system codes gives us a common starting point, like the first six digits are universal of WCO, but beyond that, jurisdictions diverge. The EU's combined nomenclature extends to eight digits. The HCS US goes to 10. Basically, each has its own structure and logic. Even where regional blocks share deep harmonization, like ASEAN's eight-digit AHTN, the national level codes beyond that still vary. So if you're operating across borders, and most of you probably are, you're not just managing one data standard, you're managing several. And any AI system you use needs to account for that, or it's going to give you confidently wrong answers tailored to the wrong jurisdictions. And this problem will only continue to grow as the regulatory complexity increases around the world. Cool. Now let's talk digitization. Okay. But before we talk about where AI is being used, let's kind of acknowledge a trend I think everyone's been seeing. Compared to other industries, technology in general tends to lag behind in trade compliance. And this isn't really a feeling like the data also backs it up. As you can see, in a McKinsey study, they analyzed 22 industries on how digitized they are. So the leaders were ICT, media, financial services. Transporting, warehousing, and logistics sit in the bottom tier alongside construction and agriculture at only roughly 44% digitized. For context, retail is at 55% and high tech is at 54%. And trade compliance specifically, it sits even lower within that logistics bucket because it's a sub-function that historically has been underinvested in. And it's not just about the technology. It's really about what we think is the readiness of the people. They also found that 92% of companies report having insufficient talent to operate digitally enabled supply chains. They didn't say like could use more. They specifically highlighted insufficient. So that gap is also not closing. They also observed that only about a quarter of supply chain professionals believe their companies have actually completed any meaningful digital transformation. And over 40% of organizations still have limited or no visibility into even their tier one supply performance, let alone tier two or three. Meanwhile, in the compliance world specifically, an EY survey found that while majority of compliance leaders say digital tools are part of their strategy, only 55% have actually implemented or optimized them. And the number one barrier 47% said it was simply due to a lack of time. It wasn't budget, it wasn't buy-in, it was simply time. So when I say that trade compliance is behind, this gives you like a kind of an idea. The broader supply chain and logistics world it's already a world that is one of the least digitized in the global economy, and trade compliance is lagging within that. And there's a couple of specific reasons why this is. And the first is structural. Okay. Trade compliance has a unique dynamic where the quality of your work is ultimately judged by an external auditor. In the US, that is CBP. Okay. So innovation isn't necessarily driven by internal efficiency alone. It's bottlenecked by the guidance and approval of government bodies. So you could build today one of the most advanced AI tools in the world for trade. But if the regulator hasn't told you how they want to see it used, or more importantly, how they don't want to see it used, you're operating in a gray zone. And I've experienced this firsthand. I recently actually wrote an article where we analyzed all the relevant CBP rulings on this topic. And what we found is that CBP has been aware of AI tools for the better part of a decade now, but they still haven't provided a clear affirmative framework for what technology can do. So the guidance we've seen focuses much more on what you can't do, or more accurately, what doesn't excuse you from your reasonable care obligations. So for innovators and builders in this space, that is a real challenge because we don't have a clear roadmap of what we can and can't build towards. Cool. Second, traditions or culture. And I say this with a lot of love for this industry, but this is the nature of this field. Like when we first started Ginger Control, I met a lot of customs brokers in the US, and they were still using the physical HGS US book. Um, and a lot of them haven't really even touched the digital version. And there's also like a running joke in this industry that anyone that there's no one that intentionally goes into trade compliance. People tend to like fall into it, which means you often don't have a workforce that's been trained with a technology first mindset. Now, that's not a criticism. It's frankly the reality, and it's changing. Awesome. So let's walk through the areas where AI is generally being used today in trade compliance. So the first and most for sure, it is denied party screening. So screening your customers, suppliers, counterparts against sanction list, don't party list, you get the idea. Tools in this space use AI and fuzzy matching to catch variations in names, addresses, and aliases. So where a simple keyword search would miss. Like think about it, like a sanctioned entity isn't going to spell their name the same way every time. So AI is able to hand that kind of complexity. So Document processing and data extraction. This is an area where technology works well, but where the legal picture is stricter than most people realize. So AI-powered OCR and natural language processing, these tools can read a commercial invoice, a packing list, a bill of lading, and extract the relevant data fields automatically. So instead of someone manually keying in descriptions, quantities, values, origins from PDF, the system reads the documentation and populates into your customs management platform. It's not glamorous, but it's saved an enormous amount of time. But I've highlighted this for a reason. Um, CBP has, well, at least in the US, CBP has consistently held since 2009 that the act of identifying what data from a shipment document should appear on customs entry counts as customs business. And I believe that's under Section 1641. That position was reaffirmed in a recent ruling in January 2026. So it doesn't matter whether um, it doesn't matter whether a licensed broker reviews the output for filing, the preparation itself is what's regulated. Under the statute, if you're preparing a document that's intended to be filed with CBP, that is customs business. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? So, brokers can absolutely use OCR tools within their own operations. They're conducting customs business under their own license. But an unlicensed technology company providing document to entry data extraction as a service to importers, now that is crossing a regulatory line because the tool is making decisions about what constitutes relevant entry information. So that's not merely just um, electronic transmission of data, which is also a statutory exception. That counts as an entry preparation. And this is one to watch closely, especially if you're evaluating vendors. The question isn't does the tool work well? You should be pointing it towards, is the entity performing this activity licensed to do it? Right. Cool. Awesome. Classification. Also highlighted, which I'll get into soon. This one has been increasingly popular, and it's where things get both exciting and legally nuanced. AI tools can take a product description and suggest an HS or like HTS code. Some of them can like cross-reference GRI rules, CBP binding rulings to support the recommendations. The promise is significant, like reducing classification research time from like perhaps 30 minutes or an hour into seconds, right, with an auditable reasoning trail. But this is also an area where CBP has drawn the clearest lines. That same ruling from earlier addressed AI classification tools directly. So the starting point is a six-digit threshold. Okay. Classification to the six-digit HS level is not categorically customs business, but it gets more complicated around beyond six digits. So CBP did not rule that any AI tool generating 8 or 10-digit classifications automatically requires a broker's license. So what triggers the requirement is a combination of detailed classification and a nexus to merchandise being entered. In a 2017 ruling, CBP found that a detailed classification database covering thousands of products was permissible, even at the full subheading level because it operated as a general research resource. It wasn't tied to specific importations. And the final decision, the final classification decision was ultimately being evaluated by a licensed customs broker. So yeah, where it comes impermissible is when the tool provides specific subheadings for specific goods that are being entered with CBP, particularly when the classification tool and the entry filing workflow exists on the same platform. So, in that context, the tool is effectively directing what classification appears on the entry, and no disclaimer can really change that. Yeah, cool. Let me see if anyone has any questions. Okay, we'll bring it up later. Okay, cool. Awesome. Next slide. Supply chain visibility and risk assessment. Now, this is also a big one. And it's where governments themselves are starting to use AI too. CBP has partnered with a company called Altana on what they're calling AI-powered product passports, essentially digital records that can track a product's entire journey from raw materials through manufacturing through the finished product. And the idea is to give CBP visibility into tier two, tier three, and deeper supply chain relationships, which is something that they've historically have had no insight into. They describe it as global entry, but for goods, where importers who can demonstrate full supply chain traceability gets expedited clearance. Yeah. And this matters because regulations like the UFLPA require you to prove your supply chain is clean. You can't just claim it, you actually need to prove it with evidence. And when your tier one supplier is like in Mexico sourcing from a tier two in Vietnam, who's also getting raw materials from tier three in Xinjiang, that's a problem. And that's a problem you can't solve with a spreadsheet. So AI can help you map and monitor those networks at a scale that simply, isn't possible manually. Awesome. Lastly, regulatory monitoring and change management. So AI tools that continuously, these are AI tools that continuously monitor regulatory changes, such as new tariff schedules, updated sanction lists, revised export controls, and alert your team when something affects your product portfolio. So in a year where the US had, Section 301 expansions, IEEPA tariffs, reciprocal tariff adjustments, and the Supreme Court rulings changing the landscape, that the ability to automatically flag like what's changed and what that means for your entries, that is enormously valuable. Okay, cool. So the authority use of AI. So what customs authority are already doing? So it is not just the private sector. Authorities themselves are starting to invest in AI. CBP, for instance, they have published an extensive AI use case inventory. They're using AI for cargo risk screening, anomaly detection and import data, passport validation, agriculture inspection targeting, and as we mentioned, supply chain visibility, supply chain traceability through product passports. The EU is exploring AI for customs risk management as part of their broader customs data hub, customs reform, with proposals to create an EU customs data hub that would ultimately centralize import and export data, and to also use analytics to target high risk shipments. The WCO has been actively promoting the use of AI across member customs administrations, estimating that roughly one in three customs entries globally are misclassified, which gives you a sense of the scale of the problem that AI could help address. Cool. Now we've talked about what's working. Let's talk about what is not working that well. As we discussed, okay, let's start with regulatory guidance from the authorities. So we discussed the OCR classification, in the recent CBP's January 2026 ruling, and that is the most concrete guidance we've seen on AI and customs so far. But notice what it did. So it told us where the lines are, not where the opportunities are, or basically how to go forward. It's a ruling about what constitutes unlicensed customs business. It's not really a framework for how to use AI responsibly. The reasonable care standard under Section 1484 still applies, meaning the importer of record is responsible for accurate classification, regardless of what tool they're using to get there. So if an AI tool gives you a classification and it's wrong, you can't point at the AI and say, that told me so. The legal liability still is with you. And for those that are building in the space as well, the frustration is that CBP has been aware of AI tools like for nearly a decade, but the affirmative guidance hasn't arrived yet. So we know what we can't do, right? It's like giving a teacher an exam and they're going to tell you what's wrong. Um, we're still waiting on a clear guidance and what we can do so we can truly take trade compliance to the next level. So yeah, basically innovation guidance is it's not giving us the right tools to go forward. The second is AI hallucinations and compliance. Now, this is a real risk that perhaps doesn't get enough attention. LLMs can and do hallucinate. They generate confident, plausible sounding answers that, sometimes are completely wrong. Um, in a consumer context, that's fine. I mean, it's just an annoyance. But in trade compliance, that is a liability. Imagine an AI tool confidently citing like a CBP binding ruling to support its classification, but then it turns out the citation it's like it doesn't exist, or it generates an HS code that looks right, applies to a similar product, but has a different like duty rate. If that goes into your entry filing unchecked, you are exposed, and this is why human in the loop. This is why human in the loop isn't just a nice to have. It is essential with technology. Um, the tech is emerging, it's evolving, but the technology is not infallible. Cool. And lastly, full end-to-end autonomous compliance. So this is basically the idea that AI can handle your entire compliance workflow autonomously, from classification to filing I don't know, application to filing FTA, for qualification for audit response without human oversight. That's not really a reality today. Now, there are too many edge cases, like too much regulatory nuance, and also too much liability. I think that's probably the biggest thing. There's too much liability exposure. But here's like our honest take from Ginger Control. We don't believe that these limitations are going to be permanent. The pace at which this technology is improving is exponential. What's not working today will likely be working within a few years, if not sooner. The question is whether AI will get there. Sorry, the question isn't whether AI will get there. The question is whether the regulatory frameworks, the data infrastructure, and the willingness of this industry to adapt and adopt will keep up. So, yeah. Okay. So we've talked about what AI is, where it's being used, what the governments think about it. Now let's talk about something that I think is massively underappreciated in the space. And frankly, I don't hear much of the existing vendors talking about it today. And that is data security and data governance. So as global trade compliance tech evolves, data compliance, risk, and security will become more important than ever because the entire data architecture that underpins trade operations is going to need to be redesigned. Um, when the tech and regulatory landscape finally align, there will be a standardized protocol that ensures data compliance from a national security standpoint. But we're not there yet. Um, for the emerging tech today, like us builders can only do what's best, which is perhaps to obtain the standards to certifications such as like SOC 2, ISO 27, encryption, and build responsibly. If you are in the data workflow, I want to shed some light to you about how much risk is already in your existing systems. Cool. Your existing databases already carry a certain amount of risk. So your ERPs, your global trade management systems, your TMS platforms, they all carry data risks, meaning they all have attack services. A motivated bad actor with the right tools could potentially find a way into your data. Okay. Not too long ago, actually, there was a kid who jailbroke an LLM to do malicious cyber attacks into large corporations. In the future, as good technology improves, like so does the bad technology, making offensive cybersecurity tools more accessible. So that threat is growing. Um, and if you're on the export side, you know this matters a lot. And then arguably, export compliance, data security matters even more than import. The penalties of ITAR violations can be existential for a company. We're talking about like, I don't know, $1.3 million per violation for civil penalties, and criminal penalties that include imprisonment. So if your classified and controlled technical data is sitting in a system that's not properly secured, you're carrying a risk that goes far beyond fines. Awesome. So if you're evaluating a new vendor or new tech, whether for classification, screening, document processing, or anything else, your data security risk is being directly being tied to how the solution is being implemented. Not all architectures are equal. So let me walk you through the main ones. So firstly, multi-tenant SaaS. This is like modern ERPs, like also GTMs, CargoWise, etc. Your data sits on a shared infrastructure alongside other customers' data. Now it is like logically separated, but it's physically on the same servers. So this is the most common model, and it works well for most use cases. But the risk is that a breach affecting that platform will affect everyone. You're also trusting the vendor security posture entirely. So trusting their processes like, their patching, their access controls, their employee embedding, etc. Secondly, API-based services. So, if you're using APIs for screenings or classification or whatever, when you call an external API to classify a product, your product description, material composition, and potentially your supplier info is leaving from your environment into being processed on someone else's servers. So the question becomes, where is that data being stored? How long? Is it being used to train models? Is it being logged? And most enterprise-grade providers will give you contractual assurances, but you still need to read the fine print. Okay. Cool. Next is private deployment. So this is the most secure architecture for sensitive data. The AI models runs within your own infrastructure or a dedicated cloud environment. So your data actually never leaves the perimeter. And this is where perhaps export compliance, export companies or government contractors need to be. But it's also the most expensive to maintain. So as a general rule, the more sensitive your data, the more control you will need over your infrastructure. Um, so for most trade compliance workflows, enterprise SaaS with proper certifications is sufficient. For export controlled and classified data, I'm going to go ahead and say that private deployment is the baseline. Yeah, awesome. Now, the out-of-the-box LLM problem. So I noticed the time, so I'll try and speed things up. Um, but there's an elephant in the room that we need to discuss right now, right? Which is today, people in trade compliance are still uploading screenshots or documents such as their commercial invoice, entry summaries, and supplier data into ChatGPT, Claude, and other LLMs. I've seen it, you've probably seen it too. This is a massive red flag. When you paste your customs data into a consumer AI tool, the data is being processed on external servers. Now, depending on the provider's term, uh, it may be stored, logged, or even used to train their models. For your general business queries, that's like fine. Um, for trade data, that includes supply information, product specification, and others. Yeah, that is a real compliance risk. And I know a lot of you know this, but I think some of you are still doing it. Um, yeah, and it is not just ChatGPT or Claude. There's actually one that catches most people off guard. Microsoft Copilot. And hear me out. Okay. Unless you have an enterprise account with Microsoft, it's generally recommended not to share or upload sensitive documents through Copilot either. Um, the Copilot and business tiers do not have the same data protection guarantees as the enterprise tier. So if you're using Copilot through a standard Microsoft 365 subscription and feeding it your trade compliance documents, your data may not be as protected as you think. So make sure to check your licensing tier before you assume you're covered. And why does this matter? So if you want a real world example, let's just look at what happened between Anthropic and the Pentagon. Anthropic, a company behind Claude, had a $200 million contract with the US Department of Defense. When the Pentagon demanded unrestricted access to use Claude for all purposes, including mass surveillance of Americans and autonomous weapons, Anthropic refused. They drew a line and said that they wouldn't allow the technology to be used that way. And as you can imagine, the result, the Pentagon designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk, which is a label normally reserved for foreign adversaries. So President Trump ordered all federal agencies to stop using Claude. Thankfully, a federal judge just blocked the action, calling it a First Amendment retaliation. But why does this matter? Because it demonstrates even at the highest levels, the question of who controls AI and who can and what it can access is unresolved. If the Pentagon and one of the world's leading AI companies cannot agree on data governance boundaries, what makes you think your vendor has it all figured out? Cool. Really quickly, three questions to ask your vendor. So, This is like a practical takeaway. When you're evaluating a new trade compliance tech or global trade solution, here are three questions you should ask before you sign anything. So, first of all, where does my data physically reside and who has access to it? Um, it's not just is it in the cloud, like specifically which region, which data center, and which employees of the vendor can access it. If they cannot give you a clear answer, that is a red flag. Cool. Is my data being used to train, fine-tune, or improve models, and can I opt out? I'm just gonna skip ahead because like I think we have like 10 minutes left, and I want to have some question time for Q&A. So yeah, awesome. Also for the slides, I want to create a document that has all the details to send everyone after. So the opportunity. So with all that said about being risk, let's flip the coin because if you have your data security in order, the possibilities of what it can do is genuinely exciting. The recent advances in LLMs combined with what's happening with agentic AI, tools like OpenClaw that can autonomously execute tasks across systems. They are opening up new use cases that weren't possible even a year ago. And let me just show you really quickly. So tip of the iceberg is kind of where we're at right now, and the bottom is where the future will be. Awesome. So the future of trade compliance. Spoiler alert, for those who are getting nervous, customs brokers are not going to be replaced, not in the near future, and I'd argue not even in the next 50 years. And the reason why is the liability framework under Section 1641. Okay, it requires a licensed customs broker for the transacting of customs business. Now that's not a guideline; that is a statutory law. And as we saw with the recent AI CBP ruling, it's reinforcing that boundary. It's not loosening it. The same is true in the EU, where customs representatives operate under the Union Customs Code provisions. In the UK, post-Brexit, customs representatives still require authorized economic operator status or customs broker registration. So, what will change though is what the humans spend their time on. So the mundane tasks, the manual data entry, copy pasting between systems, basic classification research, like all of those mundane repetitive tasks will be automated, and that's a good thing. Trade compliance teams will be shifting towards higher value activities. Now, okay, let me just skim through this really quickly. So, yeah, cool. The bigger picture. The world's changing. Everyone, the world is changing. It's not even just about your work right now. Like it is your everyday life. We are going to see AI-powered robots roaming the streets. Okay. The future of dating, and this is gonna sound crazy, but the future of dating will involve your own AI agent going on dates with other AIs to find your match. And yes, that is quite literally already happening in a platform with like Old Match. So I'm not trying to build up hype or anything. I'm just a builder in the startup scene, so I can see where the future is going. So. Yeah, okay, cool. Most all normal things today will be fundamentally different over the next few decades. So why do I bring this up? Because for you to excel and thrive in this new era, understanding technology, its limitations, its benefits, and its practical use will be one of the best investments you can make in yourself. Okay, understanding technology will be one of the best investments you can make in yourself. The future does belong to the people who can utilize new tools to the fullest. In trade compliance, yes, there is an extra hurdle of regulatory restrictions, but trade compliance will be no exception to innovation. So, yeah, awesome. There's a few tips I want to go through, but I realize time is closing down. So I'm going to skip through it really fast. So digesting lots of data, you can use Notebook LM. It is a very great tool for people who haven't tried it out yet. For instance, if you have like a ruling or some sort of like document you don't want to read, paste it into Notebook LM and it will give you, it will turn that boring documentation into a digestible format, like a podcast, even a video, presentation,
Mm.
study. Yeah,
Mm.
cool. Claude basic setups LLM. So if you aren't already, make sure you are utilizing the instructions because I know a lot of you are still writing the whole context of like every question for every conversation. Like you're rewriting all the context for of yourself or the business. Like you can put like a file into the instructions of your AI. Just tell you who you are, give you a whole context, and it will understand who you are every time you open a new chat. An example instruction was something like this. Like I said, it'll be in the slides, so you can copy and paste it after. So. Another is the switching chats. And the reason why is because there is a problem with LLMs, which is, oh, it's not really a problem, but it's a limitation, which is the context window. Basically, the longer the conversation flow, the more likely it's going to hallucinate. So make sure you change chats. Make sure you stop and open a new conversation every 5 to 10 um, exchanges. So yeah,
Okay.
cool. And lastly, your AI, your own AI executive assistant. I won't get too deep into it, but with the new technologies like OpenClaw, you can now create your own customs AI executive assistant. So if anyone's kind of interested in what that looks like, I'll have you talk about it after too. But yeah, I'm just gonna skip ahead. Okay, really quickly. So where are we headed? Okay. Here's the simplest way I can frame it. The role of customs compliance professionals is going to shift from doing the work into directing the work. Like I said, the mundane activities, manual data entry, this will all be done by technology. And I'm going to say it's not even going to happen in the next few years. I mean, the next decades, it's already started to happen now. So you're probably wondering what stage of the human. That will be the high value work, the high judgment work, such as tariff engineering, etc. Yeah, and the compliance teams, they aren't going to shrink, they're going to shift, right? Like 60% of the week right now is probably doing mundane tasks. Um, I think people that lean into technology will be more on the advisory side or strategic advisory side. And lastly, the tech stack. Like the biggest problem I see right now as a vendor is that a lot of different companies are using multiple different tools at once that don't speak to each other. And in the future, people need to be more conscious about, how that actually looks going forward. Because if they have 10 billion tools that does one thing great, it's going to take a lot of time and work to actually be efficient. So yeah, I'm just gonna finish right there. I think like there's been a lot. I won't even worry about the final poll. Yes, this is me, and I realize there's a lot I haven't talked about, so I'll be having another webinar soon in the next few weeks. But yeah, we'll end it there and save like 4 minutes for questions. So cool,
Thanks a million, Chen.
awesome.
I was fascinated with every word you had to say there, but I was also keeping an eye on the questions, and they're I mean, sorry, Yvonne and Mark's question are kind of similar in the sense that the accountability, like say, for instance, specifically if you're classifying a product, like you're who is ultimately responsible, and you did touch on that as we went through the presentation. Augustin, thank you for yours. Could you please clarify how the tool manages FTA integration? If you had any comments on that, Chen.
Yeah, so we're actually working on that right now. I think there's a lot of tools there's quite a few right now that already kind of manage the FTA section. For us, like we are still kind of working on it at this stage, but yeah, like it's part of like the classification and tariff kind of workflow as well really using technology and AI to extract, using RAG to extract the right information to keep up with the FTA qualifications. Like, yeah, it's something that will definitely happen in the next few years. But like, I want to say again, if you do look for vendors, please make sure that that you understand if, first of all, if they have certifications and if they have a good compliance background. Like a lot of startups today who vibe code something in like a day, and then they say, "Oh, I have this amazing thing," but really they don't really know what they're doing. They don't understand trade. So if you're going to look for an FTA kind of system or tool, make sure one that they are compliant. Two, they understand the technical complexity of an integration with your system. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with that person afterwards as well. Like I think we can get really deep into it. So yes.
Let's stay connected. Absolutely. Thanks, Chen, and thanks, Augustine, for that. Julian, there's a question about the CBP ruling. If you could just let us know if Chen answered that during the presentation. Oh, sorry, whose license number is being used against that filing?
Okay.
It's back.
So this is a good question. So this will depend, and there isn't a solid framework, but for us right now, so to put it out there, we are not licensed. Okay, so the people we take on has their own customs department. They have their own license. So if if you if I wouldn't be allowed to do any sort of customs or automation, whatever, with an import that doesn't have customs brokers. That's a direct violation. But what I'd suggest is if you are looking for a vendor, it, make sure either you have a license, or they have one. there needs to be a license in place and within the workflow. And any company, any software vendor that says, "Oh, we're not licensed, but we can still help you automate data extraction to entry," no, that's just a clear violation. So, for whose license will be used, most likely it will be. It depends also on the service as well. Like if it's like an ABI, right? That's going to be the software. If it's going to be maybe